The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. This is Danny Ryan from ThreeWill. I'm the VP of Business Development and co-founder. And this is a webinar on migrating to Office 365. And my subject matter expert for the day is Mr. Chris Edwards. Welcome, Chris.
Hello, hello.
Awesome. I appreciate everybody joining today. I think what we're going to do, the format for this is going to be conversational. Chris and I are just going to talk about some questions that we think are important for our customers to know about migrating to Office 365. And just before we get started here, Chris, I guess you've done a couple of these migrations before in the past.
Yes, mainly one for our own purposes, our internal stuff to Office 365, and then also a few customers as well.
Awesome. So let me do a little. This sponsor here who's paying for this webinar, just ThreeWill. A lot of folks who are on the call today are current customers, so I'm not going to spend very much time at all on this. We've been around for a long time, focused in a lot of Microsoft technologies, excited about the stuff going on right now with Office 365. We have probably the thing I'm most proud about, if you had to take anything away, we've taken these surveys that Microsoft does from an independent source. And the last 4 times we were ranked in the top 5% of Microsoft partners. So I'm pretty proud of that. I think that's pretty awesome stuff. We've also built a lot of connectors for companies like Atlassian and Jive Software and Salesforce.com. That's it with the commercial break. We can now go into the material. First one, let me give you the slow pitch here.
Okay.
And just tell me what, for the people who may be new to Office 365, what is it, and why do you want to migrate to Office 365?
Right. Well, I think it's important to kind of have a quick definition of what Office 365 is. If you're trying to migrate to it, if someone's assigned the task of actually moving a company to Office 365, probably should have a good idea of what we're actually talking about here. So. I'll read a definition from a coworker, Pete Skelly. I think it's actually a pretty good definition of what it is. It says, Office 365 is an evergreen software as a service, or SaaS, environment which provides a continually updated suite of software services, including email, calendaring, task, search, calibration, sites, and more from Microsoft. Okay. So it's pretty much all the stuff that you're used to working with from a business perspective, all the Office products, Word, Excel, all that kind of crunchy goodness that folks love and are normally used to working with, plus SharePoint, plus email, plus some of the new things that are coming down the pike, like Delve, which is a pretty cool little add-on to Office 365. Office 365 is cloud-based, so it's a situation where you don't have to have this infrastructure in your environment anymore. You can have all these services in the cloud, up and running, and basically updated for you, where you don't have to worry about backups, things like that. You can license your users if users want to install Office on up to 5 machines, they can do that. As long as you got the licensing for it, they can install it on up to 5 different machines, which is very cool. Just being able to do that and not worry about the licensing issues, that go along with it. Like I said, it's cloud-based. Eliminate the need for all the hardware infrastructure. That's kind of my thing. It was Now I was involved a lot with the infrastructure at ThreeWill, and kind of hosting SharePoint and keeping extranets up and running and making sure backups were done and all that kind of stuff. And be able to kind of push our content out to the cloud and not have to worry about that so much. It's not that you don't necessarily have to worry about it, but it's not a day-to-day thing that you have to deal with.
The thing that I've noticed is your hair is actually starting to come back.
It's starting to come back in?
Amazing.
Okay.
I think that's, No, it's
the chia pet hair?
I'll have to tell you, seriously, the thing I'm noticing is there's a smaller hum coming from the server room. White noise is good, but
I can fix that.
Yeah. But okay, that's great. I think you got into some of the why you'd want this. It sounds like it's sort of like from a business productivity standpoint, it's a lot of pretty much what you need.
Yeah, it's all the stuff you need, and I think Microsoft's doing a good job of introducing things that you may not know that you need. It's that kind of thought. It's like, oh, there's some cool new stuff that's coming out there, and really trying to stay ahead of the curve with that. So
next one, and this is probably easier to go see. Chris and I have been working together, and we put these questions out as a series of blog posts on the world famous ThreeWill.com. So if you're interested, I've gotten some of them up. Not all of them up quite yet, but this one has, since we're talking about references, aka URLs, it's probably maybe easier if you wanted to go see some of these sites that Chris references, just to go to our website and go look up this question. It'll be a recent one that we put out there. Okay. But what's important? What sort of resources do you feel like is important for people to know about when they're doing this?
Yeah. So I mean, one of the things I think is very important, and I'll hit this probably several times as we're talking, is making sure if you're going to move to an environment, whether it's Office 365 or any environment, I think it's important to establish an inventory and establish a plan of how you're going to do that. So the first set of links that to kind of dive into, and you'll see on the blog post, is really around more the planning exercise. Got a pretty simple one out there to go out. And how do you, if you're looking at your SharePoint environment, your maybe on-premises SharePoint, and you wanted to know what has actually been organized in that environment, and I want to be able to migrate that. There's a simple link out here for building an inventory that, again, it's an easy way to know what's been done. So there's some links for that. There's, if you want to plan your email, if you want to do an email migration, a lot of times that's maybe the first thing that people kind of dive into Office 365 with. That's what we did, is dive into email first. Well, how do you plan for that? How do you kind of make that a seamless process? So the links, migration planning is one kind of format of the links. Another grouping, if you will, is more of the Office 365 setup. Things around how do you set up the administration portal, how do you set it up with your on-premise environments. Maybe you want to keep an on-premise environment. You may want to keep kind of a hybrid of the two. How do you actually go about doing that? How do you make the decisions around that? There's some links in here from a setup perspective that get into that. Mm-hmm. If you're more on the developer side and you're interested in more of, okay, I want to develop some apps for Office 365 or SharePoint, or there's some direct links to GitHub in this case for the patterns and practices teams. Some really good content, some good guidance there, some practical guidance in those links, but also some real code and some examples too. So if you're interested in more of the developer or the code side, then there's some really good information there. And then tools, utilities. If you're doing a migration and you want to actually get this done in a very predictable way, I've put some links to some tools, some migration tools like the DocAv tool from AvePoint and Migration Expert from Metalogix and ShareGate and some other ones, so that you can maybe take a look at them, do a free trial, see which ones are interested and maybe work for you. Mm-hmm. So, and then a few other ones like around security, governance, and some things from Microsoft around their privacy, how they share data, how they deal with that kind of stuff. Where is the data stored? It describes kind of how Microsoft organizes their data centers. Mm-hmm. And then customization is another large chunk. If you wanted to customize, kind of like going back to that developer topic again. Yeah. What are some guidelines and some things to be aware of when you're customizing Office 365, more particularly SharePoint? How would you go after and do that? And it kind of dives into those.
That's great. And actually, as you were talking there, I just started showing my screen and pulled up the website and some of the links that are out there. So it's just cool. I'll probably just run through those as we're maybe if there are ones that are in particular, maybe better for me to have a visual of. I'll just pull it up on my screen.
Makes sense.
So that's great. And I also, if folks have other links, there's a comment section on here. Would love to
Absolutely
hear more links that perhaps you're using that were helpful when migrating. Love to see any interaction on the website.
Right. Yeah. The key thing to keep in mind, this is it's really more of a brain dump. These posts that Danny's pulling up and some of the things we're talking about, more of a brain dump just from past experiences. There's definitely more information. There's more stuff out there. That definitely look forward to people to add and comment on and contribute. So it's just getting the conversation going.
Nice. So what are the differences with migrations? What are some of the different approaches that people could take to do the migration?
Sure. So I mean, I kind of laid out my big three, or kind of the big three thing. I think you would look at is, do you want to buy a tool to do the migration? Put the ownership on a tool to actually get the things done for you, or do you want to do it manually? Some folks are depending on how large their shop is, whether they're dealing with large SharePoint environment, do they want to just manually move their content over, or do they want to build something that's custom? Basically, there's a blog post out there that's related to this as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think in the end, I mean, I would lean people towards investigating the tools first, and really kind of kicking some tires on that to see if one of them will work for you. Again, there's free trials out there. Why not give them a shot? If you're dead set on, I don't want to buy a tool, I just want to do this myself, you can do it manually. And the blog post that I put out there describes kind of how you would, from a SharePoint perspective, how maybe you'd move some sites. In this case, in the example I give, I'm moving sites from SharePoint 2010 to Office 365. And I kind of lay out the painful process of how that worked. I really wanted to go through that process to say, okay, if we were to do this manually, what it would look like, what is really possible. Microsoft doesn't really provide a way to say, here's a site collection backup. Take and upload that to Office 365 and then make a site out of it. There's no simple way of doing that where you could with more of an on-premises type scenario. So, maybe that's a good thing, because their stuff has changed. The things are they don't know where you're coming from. You may be coming from 2007, maybe coming from 2010. You may be coming from a different environment altogether, like Jive or some other repository. So I mean, really, I would say use a tool. Find the tool that works for you. Like I said, feel free to read through the blog post. It kind of describes, like I said, some high level of how would you do this manually. But
that's wonderful. This is what you should not do.
Pretty much, yeah.
Maybe it'd be more effective if you said it's a pain that you put that in the blood red or something along. Don't follow this. Turn around.
Please don't do this ever.
I would never.
Leave it to the experts. No, I mean, if you've got just a few sites, I mean, there may be some small sites, and maybe there's just a few in your environment you just want to move over. Following a process like this is totally could be fine. Okay. And that's why I wanted to kind of work through that. And again, there may be things that I've missed. I'm not saying that there's other, this is the end all be all way of doing this manually. There may be other even better ways. And again, I'd open it up to comments. If folks have better ways of doing this stuff, I'd definitely love to learn about it. It's really more of that collaborative kind of spirit here.
Yep. Awesome. So this is sort of like a two-part question here, which is what should we migrate? Let's start with that.
Okay. Well, so one of the things that I talked a little bit about this earlier is the whole planning concept. Is you really want to kind of understand what is in your source environment before you kind of go forward with a migration, right? If you don't know what's in your source environment, your current environment, how are you going to know if you're successful in the end? If you can consider the migration done and completed successfully. I kind of emphasize that in some of these blog posts. So, what do you migrate? I mean, things like, SharePoint sites, SharePoint document libraries, things like that. It's important to make an inventory of those. And I think, most of that stuff most likely will come along, right? Will be migrated. But I think it's important when you're going through this inventorying process is to figure out, okay, what sites do I just not care about anymore? What sites are just not used anymore? I really like, kind of taking a step back. I really think it's an opportunity when you're migrating to 365 to clean things up.
To clean house.
Yeah. The less you have to migrate, the faster this is going to get done too, right? So if you can keep things that you don't use anymore, take an inventory. Yeah. Figure out what of that inventory you don't need anymore, and really focus on the highest priority items and work on them first. I think that's definitely a good step in the right direction. Again, it's trying to make you successful. You don't want to be doing this forever. You want to get this done. You really want to start taking advantage of the opportunity that Office 365 presents to users. I mean, some great stuff out there. Let's get this done and get it in their hands, and really take the opportunity to do it right. So, I kind of lay out some things. We've done some migrations from Jive in this case. I think it's actually one of the things that references in the blog, where we go through more of a content type mapping exercise.
Okay.
So, something in Jive might be a binary file or a specific collaborative document in Jive. Well, we figure out, okay, where is that going to live in SharePoint or in Office 365? I think it's important from a content type or a type by type perspective to go through and make those mappings.
Yeah.
And that's kind of in addition to what I just said, where you figured out, okay, what is just not going to go? Have an inventory, what is going, what's not going. And then, this is really kind of from a content type by type perspective, taking a look at it and saying, okay, what do I really want to move over here?
Nice. And next is the other question. So we're talking about what should you not migrate?
Right. So, again, it's kind of like the inverse of that, right? It's like I said, it's an opportunity. Do you want to move over stale content? Stuff that's just not.
Look at this picture. She's walking away. So sad. Move on.
Bye.
You're not coming with us to Office 365.
Exactly.
You're not coming to the cloud.
See you later. Yeah. So that it's the things that that really have kind of bogged you down. Maybe in your current environment. Things like some of the customizations. Maybe you've made some very specific customizations that really just don't. They can't be migrated to Office 365. If you've got a lot of specific SharePoint farm-based solutions, maybe you've got a lot of custom code that's in there. Some of that stuff's not going to come over. So it's identifying that stuff and figuring out, okay, it's not coming over. What are my alternatives?
Yep.
How do I, does this particular piece of functionality solve a problem that I need to deal with? So this is again an opportunity. How do I do this in a proper way in a cloud-based environment? So it's just really making you think through that. Again, it kind of emphasizes the whole planning concept. How do I, where's this content going to go? Another thing I think that's really kind of tough to migrate is the more of the social piece. Social piece. Oh, look at you go.
Sorry. Clickage problem. I have a little clickage problem here. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Spilled my beans here. Sorry. Go ahead.
So what I was saying is some of the social pieces, like in SharePoint, I'm really focusing on more of the SharePoint conversation here, but things like likes and following and more of the social cues and commenting and ratings, things like that are great, but I would be careful, if they are a hindrance or if they're complicated to migrate in your situation. I would avoid them because it's really, unless there's something relevant in the conversation or in the content moving forward, let that evolve in the new environment. Let that stuff show up in the new environment. Really, I would use that information, that metadata, likes, following. How are people really looking at this information? How are they using it? Use that information when you're doing your inventory and say, okay, how should I restructure this? How should I organize my content? People are interested in this. So therefore, maybe I should organize it in a slightly different way. So it's that opportunity to be able to do that. But just purely moving that content over, I would say that's kind of lost, I think, in some cases.
It's amazing how much content that's out there that's time sensitive. So then over time, maybe just having an archive of it in a PDF is more appropriate than trying to move it over so that it can become, a Yammer thread or whatever.
Yeah, and I've heard folks, that say, I just want to move all my my social stuff into I want to go ahead and create a bunch of Yammer content, a bunch of posts in Yammer. It's like, well, do you really want to do that? It's time sensitive. A lot of that stuff is time sensitive detail. You may want to. It may be certain reasons why you would, but a lot of times it's who's going to look at it. Are you just going to clutter up your system?
I just have this visual in my mind, like seeing, opening up Yammer and seeing like 8,362 messages and.
Yeah.
No, I don't want that.
Exactly. What do you do with all that information?
I don't want that. I do not want that. No, thank you. I've got an email box that can deal with that.
Right. Well,
that's enough.
One other thing I would just kind of throw in there.
Sorry,
it's okay. It's all right.
Sorry.
One thing I want to touch on is that I think it's easy to think, oh, I just want to go ahead and migrate all of my users, my sites. Maybe there's people have SharePoint my sites, and they're used to using that. And people have a lot of files on their desktop. It's easy to think, oh, let me use this new fantastic thing called OneDrive for Business out there. And they just go ahead and dump everything into OneDrive for Business.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that I really think that there's an opportunity there as well for users. It's really a training opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
Why not make people aware of what OneDrive for Business is. It's a great new thing in Office 365, great new service. Let people, train them how to use it and teach them how to actually load their content. Mm-hmm. Let them migrate their own content that's appropriate, let them share it appropriately, and actually use that as an opportunity to learn the platform. That would be my suggestion. Mm-hmm. Doesn't necessarily mean that is, that is appropriate for every situation, every organization, but I think it's a good opportunity to invest in some folks and get some training out there.
Nice. Okay, I'm going.
Go, you do it.
Okay.
Do it.
All right, do it. What do I need to know about user management and authentication?
Well, so one thing, kind of jumping down to the details here, is that in order for users to use Office 365, every one of the users has to have a cloud-based identity of some sort. So in order to assign a license, in order to give them actual service functionality, right? So one of the things I do, when the blog post is associated to this, and I kind of shared some information about kind of what we did wrong with regards to this. How do we jump the gun a little bit? And I'll kind of take a quick second to describe that. So one of the things we did is that we said, let's go ahead and start using Office 365. Mm-hmm. Let's not worry about all the users. Let's just get a few users up and running, set up a tenant, and actually begin working with it. Well, when you do that, when you set up Office 365, it automatically sets you up with users that are in the on Microsoft domain, and it allows you to sign licenses, allows you to use the product. Well, whenever you come back and let's say you wanted to make your domain, your company, your actual company's domain and their domain email address as part of that structure. One of the things we ran into is that users had already created this on Microsoft set of accounts, a separate set of accounts. Mm-hmm. And when we brought in users, in this case, email accounts, it set up duplicate accounts. So that was kind of a painful thing to have to go back and clean up and just reassign licenses. So again, it goes back to that planning. It's like if you're going to dump into Office 365, it's fine to go ahead and set up maybe a dev or test tenant, kick the tires a little bit that way. But if you're going to do it for your organization, then take a step back and make sure before you add users, go ahead and make sure you understand what is the process of adding my domain, adding my email accounts, and make sure you do a good job with the users first before you really allow people to start getting in there. Gotcha. So it's just lessons learned. Again, it wasn't really a big deal for us to clean up, but it's just one of those things. We just wanted to get in there. And
if you're an organization of 10,000 people, then
yeah,
like that,
you wouldn't want to do that, right? I mean, you wouldn't want to turn them all loose and then have to go back and we made a mistake and then revoke and move things around. That would seriously frustrate people. So I would avoid that. So kind of diving deeper, so that's kind of a story related to authentication and kind of just setting up users. I'll kind of read a little bit from the blog post that's out there, is that there's really three different kinds, from an authentication perspective, there's three different kinds of identity, right? There's cloud identity, which you have to have. And then building on top of that, you've got the synchronized identity, which is really, if you wanted to have your company's Active Directory, your company's directory service, all the user accounts synchronized into Office 365, and then vice versa. I'm moving my hands, by the way.
It's very entertaining.
Exactly. Danny's like, what is he doing?
Very entertaining. They can't see us.
I know. Probably a good thing. It's probably a good thing. So if you wanted to kind of keep your identity details, in this case, maybe even your password and your profile and things like that, synchronized between Office 365 and how it's being used there, as well as your current Active Directory that's in your organization. Synchronized identity might be the appropriate tool to use there. The one thing is that with synchronized identity, you don't really get the SSO, the single sign-on experience. In order to truly get more of that single sign-on experience, there's another level of complexity you have to introduce, which is more like around a proxy service that federates and gets into more of authentication for a particular user. So if I were to sign in to Microsoft's site as cedwards@threewill.com, what it might do is it might hit Microsoft and then bounce back to ThreeWill to say basically an Active Directory Federation Service proxy. It would come back to us and say, who is this user? Is he valid? Then it would go back, kind of that whole handshake of that exchange, kind of back and forth, and actually have the ability for Microsoft Office 365 to poke back into ThreeWill in this case to find out who the user is. Now, some companies may not want that level of direction. They may not want redirects into their organization. But with that in place, you can have more of a single sign-on experience. You sign in once, and you can go all over the place. So it's really making sure you understand kind of what those are. And cloud identity is the simplest. Synchronized identity is the kind of the next level up. And it provides hooks to what's called DIRSync, which if you want to synchronize profile properties and email and pictures and things like that between what's available in Office 365 and your Active Directory, then you can do that. Federated is that next level up, which allows you to do the single sign-on experience. That's kind of the gist of it there. I mean, I've got some links in the one of the posts we talked about earlier, one of the points we talked about earlier that kind of get deeper into this and describe how do you set up these types of authentication, how do you set up these identities, and how do you set up the trust between Microsoft, your organization, your domain. It kind of gets into those details.
Here's what I had to say about that answer.
You are a huge nerd.
Nice. You got to be a little bit. I mean,
I know.
Got to dive down.
I got about maybe 10 to 15% of what you just said.
Okay, that's cool.
That's good. I'm sure folks on the line have got a lot more than I did. So
yeah, awesome.
So it looks like there's some options there, which is good.
Yeah, there's definitely some options, and it's worth understanding. Really, what do you need? Do you need to be able to synchronize identities and SSO? Yeah. Okay. I'll shut up. I'll stop talking.
All right, next up, what do we got? Where to host things.
Okay, so
what are my options?
So I just laid out 3 different options, and I think there's probably more out here, different kind of variations.
And this, by the way, is where where we ended. I was moving the blog post up, so I don't have this, so I'm not going to pull it up. But maybe you may need to talk more with your hands.
Okay, that'll be helpful. We've already established how helpful that is.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's cool. So I would say, for the big 3 options, again, there's another variation. I've kind of mentioned hybrid before, but a single tenant, where with a single tenant, you can establish your own domain, kind of like we talked about earlier with the authentication. You can add your domain as a valid domain to be used for our users to work with an environment. Single tenant allows you to do that. The complexity is pretty low. The cost is fairly low as well. If you need to step it up, you can go to what's called a multi-tenant scenario. Some reasons you might want to do that is if your company has very specific regionalization requirements where, maybe they have a tenant that lives in, Europe, one in the US. The data has to stay, the data cannot leave the particular country of origin. Maybe you have to have a multi-tenant scenario in that sense. Problem, though, is the complexities introduced. The users that are in those multiple tenants, the users that are in the U.S. and the users that are in Europe in this case, they're really external users to each other's tenant. You kind of lose functionality. Some of the things like Delve and some of the other products that are out there in these tenants, you kind of lose some of those things. It kind of falls off a little bit. So you've solved the problem by the regionalization piece, and maybe some other things around governance, but you do lose things as well. So that's kind of an option. The other option,
there's no special relationship that you can create between the tenants. At least at this point there isn't.
I have not seen that. I mean, the tenants can actually refer to each other, but they're really, the users are kind of external as they interact with each other. So it may be useful. One thing too is another option is there's a dedicated, and I don't have really a whole lot of experience with this, but my understanding is that it's Microsoft's way of saying if you wanted to be in the cloud but on your own hardware and your own environment, there's the ability to do more of a dedicated cloud-based Office 365. More of that white glove service, if you will. You've got different levels of support, and you've got more dedicated resources to work with. But potentially some of the same issues are in that with multi-tenant. So overall, I think from what I've seen, and just in my experience, the single tenant seems to be the best option for folks, as long as they can deal with some of the regionalization, some of the things related to that.
We may be getting some real-time help here from
Okay.
Kirk.
Okay, what's Kirk have to say?
Kirk, I sent you a chat message, so if you want to, I can probably just, do you have something to add here? Let me, I can unmute you here. Kirk, did you have something to add?
I was just confirming there is no special relationship when you have two tenants.
Mm-hmm.
You're in a multi-tenant environment, but you have multiple tenants. If you have two of them, they don't have a special relationship between each other.
Gotcha.
Microsoft does not consider there any special relationship there.
Awesome.
Great. Thanks, Kirk.
Thanks, Kirk.
Cool.
And there's our fact checker. Nice.
It's okay.
We
That's
have
all
a
right.
fact checker in the crowd. Thank you, Kirk. You're awesome.
That's good. So, one thing that I don't really lay out, I think, in the post too much is the hybrid. We talked about that a little bit earlier. You can have SharePoint in your on-premises environment that kind of works alongside of SharePoint that's in the cloud. Or maybe you have hybrid exchange. You may have some email in exchange services in the cloud in Office 365, and then also in your local exchange. Link, same thing. There's things you can have kind of really in both places. That's really where you start getting into those, that federated identity, and is that really needed? Because you don't want, as folks are moving from an on-premise resource to an Office 365 resource, you really don't want them to have to sign in and be authenticated every time they move around, right? You want that to kind of be a seamless experience. So that kind of goes hand in hand a little bit with the choice of whether you're going to do a federated identity or a synchronized identity. Those things are kind of go together, if you will.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Next, is there a process for migration? Oh, and we have a nice little three-letter acronym here.
Yeah, exactly. The IMM.
Tell me about IMM.
So this is just my thing, and I found this useful. Really, I kind of thought more seriously about this when we were doing the Jive to Office 365, some of the migrations with that. Is the whole concept is IMM is inventory, map, and migrate. So the thought here is that, and I kind of talked about this, I've said it many times with the planning, inventory is more of that planning, right? What are some simple ways that you can go after your target environment? Maybe it's Jive, maybe it's SharePoint, whatever. Get a list of all your buckets, get a list of all your sites, right? All your site collections, all your sites, all your web applications. Produce a list to get your hands around what are you really looking at? What are you actually what is your intent to migrate, right? And then within that, you can say I want to be able to clear off, and there's some simple tools, and I referenced one in the links earlier of how to go off and get maybe a SharePoint set of sites. I've actually written a tool inside of, and folks if interested more about that, I can share that. But if you want to go off to Jive and find out what that inventory looks like, and say Jive, I've written a tool that actually goes and produces a database that lists all this different content. What is actually out there? What do I intend to migrate? Right. Mm-hmm. The idea is that information could be fed into this mapping exercise. So map is the piece where you kind of say, I want to hand this off. I've got a collection of data, right? So that from more of a team perspective, I can hand this off to a team of folks that really understand their content. Typically, a company is going to understand their content much better than, say, I would. If I'm working with a company to do a migration, I can hand this spreadsheet. Maybe it's a spreadsheet, maybe it's a database. The inventory can be in different forms, right? It's whatever is appropriate to whatever the customer needs. Maybe it's a spreadsheet. I hand off that to a team, and they go through and they decide, okay, of these individual things, what is actually going to be migrated, right? And maybe there's some questions. The blog that's going to be related to this is going to have some questions. Should a particular item be migrated to Office 365? Do you really care about migrating this? Mm-hmm. If yes, okay, where is it going to be migrated to? You need to answer that question, right? Yeah. If no, do you want to archive this content? It may be something you want to keep. Someone may need this later on, but you want to have some decision point around this particular piece of content. Maybe you don't care about it at all.
Yeah.
And then also, who is the owner of the content? If the content can be migrated successfully, who can verify that it's been done, right? So this is this mapping exercise. Any special notes about a content, capture that, right? It's being able to kind of, at the mapping level, being able to, site by site, content by piece of content, being able to make a valid decision of where it's going to go. And then that's actually going to help if you bought a tool, it's going to help you be able to divide and conquer on your migration itself with a tool. Or even if you're doing a manual migration, it'll help you actually perform the migrate. The migrate step is the last one. Is this based on the decisions from the mapping piece? What are you going to do? You're going to execute now, right? You're going to get your stuff migrated. And that's really what's happening here.
Gotcha. And I just pulled up. I know it's not up on the blog yet, but the content that you went through for this, that's great.
So one of the things that that's worked out pretty well is that when you're going through this mapping, this inventorying process and then the mapping exercise, folks can usually kind of list out maybe a top 10. Let's say from a mapping perspective, you want to list you've got 1,000 sites you want to migrate. Well, I would encourage someone when they're doing the mapping exercise to figure out what is your top 10 most complex or sites or pieces of content that are going to exhibit the most complexity, right? Go ahead and identify those. So that way, when you're doing your migration piece, and the migration piece might be iterative, right? You might go through these 10 sites with these 10 pieces of content multiple times. You want to have something that you can kind of chew on and work through the issues, right? You don't want to have to go through and learn as you go with a large, say 1,000 sites and never know if you're going to get through everything. You want to have some predictability. You want to say, let's pick a top 10 or top 20 or whatever makes sense for your organization. Identify and pick those. And then, work through the issues of migrating those. Make sure that the owners that can verify the content, make sure that the stuff is going to end up in 365 in a way that makes sense.
Yeah.
And be able to redo it over and over again. Don't be afraid to blow it away and restart again. You really want to be able to kind of do that. It's kind of that developer model where you kind of I want to have my own little sandbox. I want to be able to work, and prove out something before I really pass it on to QA or pass it on to more of a user acceptance kind of environment. It's that same approach with more of a migration.
Good stuff. Now, next question I'm sure everybody has, which is, how do I know my content's secure?
Well, so that's just my opinion. I think that Microsoft's going to do a good job here. If they don't, they're going to be blasted for it. So I would say and they've got and I've got it referenced in the content as well.
I'll pull that up right now. I can show it to folks.
Yeah, they're very transparent about where data lives. The data is yours. So that's my understanding, is that the data when you migrate to Office 365, the data is still yours. They're going to put their best practices around getting to that data and more of, like the redundancy and the resiliency and distributed nature of the data. They're going to put best practices around those types of things, right? Making sure that your content is available. And I think they do a pretty good job on that. Is there likely that someone's going to walk into Microsoft and grab a hard drive and walk away with it? Yeah, that's probably unlikely going to happen. So from that sense, from a company perspective, from an on-premises perspective, that stuff happens all the time, right? It'd be very easy for someone to walk into their data center and grab something. And
I go back to our server room and pull a random hard drive all the time.
Just to see if I'm paying attention.
Just to make sure everything's okay. Or we've got the appropriate measures put in place.
Exactly. That's awesome. So that's just my opinion. I think Microsoft's got this covered. It's like anything else. Security is always kind of open to interpretation in terms of at what level we're talking about. I think one of the things that I do make note of in the blog is that I think you got to be careful with external user access. So if you are in SharePoint and you've invited an external user to look at your content. Well, something to be aware of is that there's certain scenarios where those external users can invite other external users, right? So based on how things are set up and the defaults, that can happen. So I think, from that perspective, I think you just have to really understand the platform and understand what that external sharing is. That's another opportunity to educate your users, right? Kind of, we talked about the OneDrive for Business earlier as an opportunity to educate users. Well, as you share with external users, I think really understanding what your organization needs and what is kind of the best practice with that. I think you need to walk through some scenarios with that, and make sure that you're not exposing data that you don't really want to.
And Kirk, I saw you had your hand raised. I'm going to unmute you here. It looked like you had another comment that you'd like to make.
Cool.
Hold on one second. All right, go ahead. You're on, Kirk.
Yeah, no, I don't go too deep in this area, but I believe that there's shredded storage and maybe other techniques in place to prevent even your data from really existing on a single drive. So if someone makes off with hardware, of course can be encryption as well. It's going to be really hard for them to get access to your data.
Right.
It's likely that it's saved across several drives, and of course that doesn't mean no one can get access whatsoever. In certain ways, I'm sure some administrator can, and they've got controls around that. But there's other controls in place like shredded storage that I think are making it harder for anyone to get access to it.
Right.
That's all.
Thanks, Kirk.
Thanks, Kirk. Cool.
All right. Next up, what we have is about customization.
Right.
Can you customize it, tailor it?
So
Tailor it.
Is that even a word anymore?
I would like for you to tailor my Office 365.
Cobble some.
Come over and
With the
tailor.
cobbler and get some custom shoes made.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's all right. So my initial reaction would be absolutely, yeah, you can definitely customize things. However, and I put this in the upcoming blog post as well, is like I would caution how far you want to take that. So, yes, you can customize it, but really I would emphasize that, or encourage folks to really learn and understand the platform and how it's organized. I mean, you've got a lot of tools, a lot of pieces, a lot of services kind of coming together here in Office 365. You've got OneDrive, you've got SharePoint, you've got email potentially, you've got Link, you've got, or I should say Skype for Business now, which has just been rolled out. So you've got lots of things that are all coming together kind of in one potential user interface, right? Mm-hmm. So I'd be, I would explore that first before I would just say go ahead and let's go ahead and customize it and change it. So this is general comment there. But one of the common things, and I'll just throw that I've got more links, in that tools section we talked about earlier. One of the common things people like to customize with the look and feel. It's like I want my SharePoint, but I don't want it to look like SharePoint. That's kind of a common thing you hear. There's some good practices for how you do that in Office 365. One of the things you've got to be aware of is that Microsoft can pretty much at any point in time. And there's certain things they have to go through and QA and prove out before they can roll changes out. But they can pretty much change things as they'd like, right? Which is a good and bad thing. You get the latest bits, you get their latest, good stuff. But at the same time, if you've made customizations, they may roll something out that could break that. So you have to be aware of. You really have to pay attention to what their release schedule is. And there actually is a true release schedule. I believe it's like blogs.office.com. I think it actually has the release schedule for what's coming out on Office 365. So pay attention to that.
That was one of the roadmap. Yeah, it was one of the links I put on the blog post that you referenced. You referenced my blog post on one of your blog posts.
Exactly, another top 10, right? I'm gonna take you down another one. But I mean, so you can do things like custom branding, maybe an example. You want to make your Office 365 look a little bit different, or you want to make it look totally different. There are ways of doing that, but since Microsoft can push out stuff at any point in time, I would lean on some of the links that I've put out there. Is one of the guidance items is to not actually make customizations to the master page. And you may have exactly. Don't touch the master page. No. You change it. I mean, it very likely that Microsoft can come by and change that, and then your stuff's either broken or gone or just in a weird place on the screen. Who knows, right? I would advise if you're doing custom branding is to look at some of the theming. There's built-in themes that you can change. You can actually go out and buy themes now for Office 365. And then if that's just not enough for you, if you kind of get in there, it's like this, okay, this changes an image and changes the colors. Oh, that doesn't really suit my company. I can understand companies want their brand to follow through and shine through, right? It totally makes sense.
Uh-huh.
There's some other options where you can apply and build custom CSS, and I give an example of that. There's a Heather Solomon post that's out there that's really kind of cool. If you get a chance to take a look at it, just with CSS and not master page, just changing CSS, she's made SharePoint, Office 365 look like something totally different. So very cool.
Nice.
So be aware that's available. Some of the other things, like building custom apps and extending Office 365 to do different things. That's something that, that's something we specialize at ThreeWill. We do that kind of stuff. And so if folks are interested in learning more about that, or even maybe talking about that a bit more, I would encourage them to talk to maybe yourself, Danny, or one of us to dig in deeper. So definitely possible. But like I said, I would just encourage folks to really learn the platform first before really changing it around and try to update it.
Great stuff. So out of these 10, what do you, if you had to say you want one thing that folks want to take away from this entire conversation?
The whole concept of the IMM, the inventory,
Okay.
mapping, migrate, just in the planning that goes into that. So making sure you've got a plan, you've got the right resources involved, you've identified your tool if you choose to do that, and you're really, you got the team in place that's going to do this, especially for larger migrations. You really want to use this as an opportunity. I mean, this can be a fun exercise. It can also be a painful. Migrations can be a painful exercise if you have to redo stuff. I shared some stories a little earlier where we made some changes. We started using Office 365 and we had to redo stuff. Those things don't make people happy, because they kind of, why are you moving me around all over the place? And they're just not pleasant, right? Mm-hmm. So planning, doing the right job of identifying, doing the planning exercise, I think is definitely an important thing. So that's really it. The kind of the essence of this is that there's some bumps in the road. We found some bumps in the road. I shared some of these in the blogs. Danny's going to put out some more of the blog posts that kind of describe some of these things we'd run into. Hopefully that'll help you avoid maybe some of those things, and make migration a little bit smoother if you decide to go down that road.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time for doing this, Chris. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're recording this entire webinar, so it will be available later on. I'll send a link out to you so you can share it with your colleagues. In the meantime, if there's any questions that you have, we do monitor the blog, so feel free to leave a comment out there, and we'll respond back to you on that. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time today to listen in. Chris, I appreciate the time that you've taken to write this up and to share some of your experiences about migrating to Office 365.
Yeah, and if folks have comments, and like I said, I definitely welcome all that. And if I've misstated anything, let me know. I would definitely like to talk through it and figure out what we can do better.
Awesome. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you so much for joining this webinar, and have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.